meeting to order.
It is
First thing is
ordered.
approval of the
Second
agenda.
one.
I'll make a motion to agenda be approved.
Okay.
Is there a second?
I'm sorry, I wasn't here for you, I can't.
Um,
Who's the other?
I'm sorry, who was that?
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
I wasn't here either, so.
Somebody else?
I second that. I'll take it.
Okay, we got a second. Well, there's approval of the agenda, not the minutes. But approval of the December 11th Finance Committee meeting, do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. We'll now turn it over to Fred for the November 14th financial report.
This is as of November 30th. I would apologize to the group and say the December statements are available, but they were only available this week, so they would not have been available on time for mailing. As of then, the end of November, we looked at a cash balance of $77.4 million, let's call it that. Medicaid risk reserve at 14.9. Investments in North Carolina Capital Management Trust of 13.8. I would make note on the asset side that we are now looking at accounts receivable Medicaid waiver at just over $5 million. That is at 50% of, it's allowing a allowance for doubtful accounts at 50%, so the actual is a little over $10 million. I would represent that given our experience and study of accounts receivable, there will be a slight difference in treatment at the next committee's review of this, simply because as we compare the accounts receivable by category of aid as of, let's say, June 30th, with what's been collected since, it's at 100%. So I can confirm, at least for that category of aid, which is very significant indeed, that we are collecting all that we are due, but extremely late. So it would not be appropriate to continue to state that as an allowance for 50%. So next time, that will be taken out as the next statement.
Fred, question. How much did you say the state owes, the total of the state owes in Medicaid?
It owes us $10 million.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
For the first time, I would say something positive about where that accounts receivable issue is, but I'll leave that further down in the agenda. Under accounts payable, going to the liability side of the balance sheet, we are at 12.7 with an IBNR on the Medicaid side of 16. Well, let's just round that up to $17 million. Accounts payable is a little higher this month than it was prior in October. The reason for that is given that it was the month of November and that when the holidays fell, there was one less check write cycle in the month of November. So the actual payables rise both because those payments were not made until the following month. Going to the fund balance, the current year Medicaid is at $4 million, meaning from the beginning, July 1, to the end of November, that was net revenue over expense on the Medicaid side. And overall, then, we were looking at 5.1 as far as all other sources, again, from the 1st of July through the end of November. Any questions on the balance sheet? Going to some greater detail, this is the yellow sheet that we're looking at, analysis of revenue and expenses. Just going through the 5th column under total Medicaid. I'll go through the major numbers on that column. Under Medicaid, the service revenue, this is the expense of providing Medicaid services, is at $106.4 million. Service expense at $104.7. So a net revenue over expense of $1.6 million year to date as of side, revenue of 14.4, expense of 12, with a revenue over expense of 2.4 overall. So the total Medicaid revenue over expense for that period of time stands at $4 million, which crosses with what's on the balance sheet. Going to the right, under state and federal, specifically the third column that's labeled total state and federal, you're looking at service revenue of $23.8 million, service expense at 20.2, with a revenue over expense at 3.6. On the administration side, revenue of 2.3 million, expenses of 2.5, and yes, there is a net loss year to date as far as state and federal of $175,000. Total revenue over expense on the state and federal side stands at 3.4 million. Moving all the way to the right, under the total column, then combining both Medicaid and all other sources of funds, total revenue of 133.4 million, total expense of 126.8, with a surplus as far as the service side at 6.5. Under administration, total revenue of 17.1, total expense year to date at 14.5, so revenue over expense of 2.6. So the total revenue over expense overall for everything, meaning services and administration from all sources, year to date stands at $9.1 million. Questions? Going to the next sheet, Medicaid budget to actual through November 14th. This goes into the service categories and what's on the positive side and what's on the negative side, and rectifies that as far as overall where we stand. It certainly identifies certain areas that we are closely looking at in service management, of course in EOT as well. The highlights, the unfortunate highlights, are on the long-term care residential, perpetually speaking, inpatient care, and PCRF. Obviously, we monitor all services and how those expense lines are proceeding through the course of the year, but those are certainly areas of focus. Innovations under Medicaid C is also an area of concern. What I would state is this, and it will become apparent in the later statements, we are in a fortunate position of having some additional revenue that's been accrued through the first half of the fiscal year, which somewhat changes these balances effective we are looking at today. It does not change the general pattern, it just narrows some of the differences so that they're not quite as severe. So when you add just under $1 million worth of Medicaid revenue to this picture, it certainly shortens. It doesn't make as acute some of the variations that you see here. But those issues in those particular service categories do remain. Going to some of the dashboards, and I will not go through them all. Going to the first one, MCO expense ratios. This is, you have your expenses on top, you have your revenue on bottom, what the ratio looks at. And what you're trying to do is keep that ratio below 100%. So when you look at Medicaid funded services, we are just under, and that is healthy and not overall reasons for concern. When you look at the medical expense ratio for state and federal, it is not in the desirable range, let's put it that way. This indicates that we do need to ante up to a certain extent some level of expenditure on the state and federal side for what we receive. It's always good to talk about revenues over expense. This is true. However, we do expect expenses to fall within a certain range. And state and federal side, we do have a little work to do to make the commitments that have been made. Money's been allocated, was following up on our vendors to make sure that those funds are expended as has been committed.
But it needs to be over 9%. It needs to be over 9%.
That's desirably where we'd like to be. Going to the next set, and here I'm looking at the Medicaid current ratio. On the Medicaid side of the current ratio, we were talking about current assets over current liabilities. Just looking at Medicaid funding, it's at 2.2. That's highly desirable. It should always be above 1. It becomes an area of concern if it falls at or below 1 for 2 or more consecutive months. Overall, for all funding sources, the current asset to current liability ratio is at 3.27, which is also healthy overall. I will next go to some of the pie charts. Medicaid services by service category. This has pretty much been consistent through the course of the year, and I do not expect this to radically change very much, indicating that 53% when you combine ICFMR and innovations, it accounts for 53% of all of the funds that we receive and expend for services. Expense by category of aid, 83% come from only 3 categories of aid, and that's AFDC 3+, innovations, and blind and disabled 21 years and older. Again, that's been consistent through the course of the year, and I expect that that will remain the case for the balance of the year. Going to the sheet that's labeled service revenue and expense by aid category. This would highlight 2 areas of concern which the AR differentially affects. AFDC, you will see that our expenses exceed revenue. This is highly unusual for that category of aid, and that is primarily the difference because of our AR. That this is the largest category of aid that is represented in our accounts receivable. And that's the most problematic that Track seemingly has in getting a hold of. Innovations is a somewhat different story. We spent some time analyzing that. Perhaps at the next review I will share with the committee some details of what we've been able to uncover. But the long and short of it is our PMPM is not keeping up with our expenses. Our expenses are on the rise, that is true. It is not by an extraordinary amount at all, but it appears that at the time that Smoky and Western combined, that we did not get the most generous consideration in terms of our PMPM rate as far as innovation is concerned. And that's much of what the difference is.
Fred, can I just have just a comment? If you don't mind, just something supportive of you. We had a really great meeting yesterday about exactly what you're talking about with the staff, spending 2 or 3 hours in a room, looking at data, really drilling down, preparing for the discussion to support what needs to change around the cost for these consumers. So we have a lot of intelligence. I think we probably didn't have so many intelligence we have today the last time we had our data book P&P conversation. So we're very prepared to provide Fred the detail of not only the issues, but just the data will prove what we feel like needs to change for so that Fred will have that.
On the last of these graphs, cover service revenue and budget to actual. And here you will see some examples of where actual revenue has exceeded our expenses, and that's true of the AB we've come to the moment in time where we start talking about amendments. They occur pretty routinely through the course of the year. It is with some degree of pleasure that I indicate that the amendments are up rather than adjustments down. I certainly wouldn't say where that's the discussion in here, so this is a good one. I'm now looking at the green sheet. It's 2 or 3 pages, and I will go through that column labeled budget revision January 22nd, 2015, and go through an explanation of each line. If I get too detailed, stop me. If I'm not explaining enough detail, stop me, and we'll go from there. First, at 4,500. There was a miscommunication between ourselves and Ashe County. The first revision that we had done some months ago indicated a 4,500 reduction in their contribution as far as the MOE. That has since been corrected, and they are giving the same amount as they did last year, so this is an adjustment up back to the level that they had contributed last fiscal year, which is $189,566. Next row is ABC. This is hard to guesstimate when you're doing a budget, so you do have to have some actual experience to adjust those numbers as you proceed through the course of the year. $10,000 was added because of Wills County, which was not budgeted for this year at all at the beginning of the year, as well as some additions from Caldwell County in the amount of $5,000. Again, unanticipated increase in revenue to us from that particular source of funds. The next row is Medicaid pass-through that was not budgeted at all at the beginning of the fiscal year. It is now at $215,000. This was a surprise to us. We did not know that we would receive any Medicaid pass-through funds. These are funds that, literally speaking, we get from DMA and we pass through a provider directly. It's not something that we process. So that is an addition here. Going down, $48,000 has been added as far as transitions to community living. This is a dollar amount in the amount of $2,000 per individual being placed under this particular program. So the anticipated placements during the course of the year has been added, and that comes to $48,000. 2.4 million dollars has been added as far as fund balance appropriated, and let me explain what that is about. The overwhelming bulk of this had to do with the movement of dollars from the fund balance to the operation funds to account for the review of leasehold improvement, equipment purchases, security upgrades, carpeting, painting, everything that you want to include in it. I will not say that the budget is, quote, nailed down in terms of the project. What I can clearly communicate to everyone is that of known identified expenses, we're sitting a little over $2 million with a $300,000 or so contingency. I expect that when push comes to shove, including furnishings and everything that gets added, will be in the 2.3, 2.4 million range when all is said and done. But this accounts for the movement of dollars from the fund balance into operations under a number of categories, because it fits into professional services, it fits into capitalized equipment, it fits into supplies and services, it fits into the maintenance line, so that's how it's distributed, generally speaking. And a smaller amount, in the amount of $68,000, just has to do with Blue Ridge Community Health Dissolution Fund. This was a 40-month term contract, and this is what we expect to utilize during the course of this particular fiscal year. $114,223 increase in Medicaid revenue. This is under administration. Of the anticipated increase in Medicaid revenue, this would be the administrative share. $21,152 as far as the Medicaid risk reserve revenue trust that he had to set aside into that reserve. So that the total Medicaid increase that's been added to the initial budget is in the amount of $922,247. And that's as of the eligibles that have been added, that are above budget, that we know of, that we've been compensated for or are owed for the first half of the year. Single stream, we have an addition of $75,000 that has been added. This is the traumatic brain injury fund, specifically to that fund. There's an increase of $188,700 as far as state non-UCR funds. This is short-term assistance to people living in group homes. This is the so-called bridge funding, if you're familiar with that language. At the start of the year, we had a reduction of approximately $285,000 in SA prevention funds. They have restored it on a one-time basis in the amount of $126,000. So that has been added to the budget. $49,980 has been added to federal non-UCR for prior period payments. This is one of those timing issues that have been added to this fiscal year for services rendered last. On the expense side, we're talking about $283,000. This is professional services for Litchfield, overwhelmingly. It is for that particular project. Supplies and materials, $312,500. That's specifically, mostly, for MIS-related supplies and services, again, for that project. Current obligations maintenance, $254,000 has been added, again, primarily for Litchfield. Fixed expenses have been added $10,358, and that's an increase as well. Capital outlays of a total of $1.6 million. Much of that in leasehold improvements, and some of that in furnishings. And finally, contracts and grants, there's been some increase in that as well, given some increases in Medicaid funds as well as the division of and how that gets distributed as far as the expenditure is concerned. Questions? I know there's a lot of detail.
Fred, are these two budget revisions we need to vote on in the main session?
Can you say that again?
On these two budget revisions, do we need to vote on in the main group?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
So the recommendation from the committee would be to the board as a whole for revision of the budget that has these amendments.
I'm trying to make a motion that we submit the budget revision number 2 to the full board for consideration.
Second.
Motion second, everyone in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Well, I promised to talk about Litchfield a bit. I did, to the extent as far as the details are concerned. Finance will be moving to address as scheduled March 23rd. The rest of the administrative team, Brian and I, at the end of the month, if not sooner, March 30th. It is going to occur on a rolling basis. Strangely enough, the floor just below, as you enter 356, will be vacated first. And the reason for that is they will start the remodeling even before we completely move out of 356. My understanding from the county is that they will sprinkler the existing building, which is a very time-consuming and expensive process that is necessary for that level of service, facility-based crisis, and so 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there is some pressure on us to actually keep by the schedule that we've established. So far, the relationships with the lease holder. It's going well, and I can honestly say I'm quite happy with our work with the architect, that the work is being done as was contracted for. For the first time, I have some good news in reference to the accounts receivable issue. On the technical assistance call, there's been a technical group that has been meeting with DMA and DMH for the last several months. One just completed on Friday. In their inimitable wisdom, the Division of Medical Assistance has identified over 700,000 client months that the LMA's MCOs have not been compensated for, given what they have identified as something that was missed, so that we can anticipate payment, our portion, Smokey's portion, of those 700,000 patient months in the month of February. There are also over 650,000 conversion issues that they have identified that they will start, quote, fixing in the month of February. Now, as I communicate that good information, do I know which categories of aid will be affected? No. Do I know the exact amount that we will be reimbursed? No. Am I going to check every single one of them? Absolutely.
Fred, have we, I just want to make sure that we're not conceding that this is the end, that by accepting this adjudication, we don't, because DHHS may, I think we need to be very clear, Ron, with them that, thank you very much, that this is not the end of the discussion.
I would just initiate this and communicate this as being progress until we actually see what's being paid for. It's kind of hard to say what's being addressed and how much of it is being resolved, if any.
For what it's worth, I would have to use the word ultimatum. We gave them an ultimatum at the last CEO meeting we had, and sent a letter to the secretary to just be sure that she was being kept aware of what she had indicated to us was one of their highest priorities. And I guess it was the consensus of my colleagues that the behavior of DMA didn't seem to indicate that it was a very high priority since they made so little progress with all of this. So maybe this pressure is helping. I mean, what's $10 million? It's actually $70 million, probably $70 million state.
This is help with establishing a good positive relationship with ones.
No, it isn't. It's a poor business relationship.
And I do remain concerned that we will have to, they're going to either approach us with a settlement or some sort of, they're not going to be able to resolve it in any definitive way.
But we submitted our detailed information back to them yet?
We have. Now, have you received a response? No, not particularly. I didn't expect it to be good.
Yeah, so we're in this process of back and forth with them to basically create our justification for the money that we're owed, and, down to an individual member basis. And so we'll see. There's a new, they did recruit, I guess everybody's read in the paper, DMA for all practical purposes is being run by a consulting firm, Alvarez and something. Everybody just calls them Alvarez. There's a second name. And they hired a CFO for DMA, actually out of Alvarez. I'm not sure how they ever convinced him to come to work for North Carolina, but they did. And we met him. He had been on the job all of about 2 weeks. So we met him. So Rick Brennan, you might remember, he got let go some time ago. So they got a new guy, Trey something. So we'll see. It's hard to describe this as good news, but it's actually good news.
view this as a dance, can last like a marathon, so this is just another marathon.
And then keep $1.
Very expensive.
Well, our options, and this was, put out on the table at the CEO meeting we had a couple of weeks ago, were to continue to work with them. And we went, at great length to describe the great frustration in trying to work with them. I think to say dysfunctional is probably a pretty fair explanation or comment on what it's been like between trying to work with them and their contractor, CSC. It's just not an acceptable way to do business, I guess. And where we get to with this, we'll see.
So we could be sitting here next year talking about the same thing.
I don't think so. The letter to the secretary said you have 30 days to correct this. And really, to just be blunt about it, what we said is we can continue to work with you, we can go to the General Assembly, or we can sue you. And they said, please give us 30 days. So we said,